Hello everyone, my name's Clay Wirestone. I'm Kansas Reflector Opinion Editor.
I'm Sherman Smith, I'm the Editor-in-Chief.
And we are back after a few weeks away from our weekly roundup of the Kansas State House. We are back now for a kind of a, video update 2.0, shall we say, where we're going to be talking about big stories from the previous week and something that might be coming up in the next week. But it's not about the State House because thankfully the legislature is out of session.
At least for now. They could always come back to tackle property taxes or a last-second gerrymander.
Who knows? The possibilities are endless. But here we are. We are in beautiful downtown Lawrence, Kansas, and we are just going to talk about some of the things that happened this last week. So, Sherman, hit me with something. What's something that happened?
Well, senior reporter Tim Carpenter was following up on the state budget that the legislature passed and realized that they failed to include any pay increase for the judicial branch employees. There's a lot of drama about how they only included a very small pay increase for state employees. In the executive branch, they gave themselves a significant raise. They also gave the legislative staff a significant raise. Judicial got nothing. This ended up being resolved sort of through some creative accounting, we'll say. The justices decided they could take existing resources, maybe make some self-imposed cuts so that they could redistribute that money as minimal pay raises for their employees.
Well, and it was nice to see, as I was telling Sherman before we started recording this, it was nice to see a situation where we wrote a story one day talking about something that had happened, something that frankly kind of went uncovered at the time. Like, people didn't really notice this when it was happening in the legislature.
Long, fiery debates in the House and Senate about the budget, and nobody said a word about this during those debates.
And so, but then to see, some sort of outcome is nice to see, although it's still only 1%.
Yeah, and I think it could come at the cost of some of the judicial branch's other initiatives. Specifically, they're trying to address the shortage of attorneys in rural parts of the state. Bring more attorneys into the profession. It's hard to stretch dollars to accomplish all of those goals when the legislature is extending them a big middle finger.
And then, also speaking about kind of run-ins with various sectors of law enforcement or judicial enforcement, I guess. The long-running story, at least it started last year, about former Coldwater Mayor Joe Ceballos reached kind of a pretty big inflection point.
I think, as you said in your column, it was entirely predictable, right? It happened last fall. The Attorney General announced he had finally found his long sought-after immigrant who is voting, non-citizen who is voting. Turned out to be the mayor of Coldwater, a longtime resident, 50 years in the country, a legal resident, but did not understand that because he's not actually a U.S. citizen, he's a citizen of Mexico, that he was not able to vote or not allowed to vote legally, and had been voting for years. Kobach initially charged him with felony election crimes, but then allowed him to plead down to some very minor misdemeanors that were still election crime related. And the hope for Joe Ceballos and his attorney was that this would allow him to stay off of ICE's radar. But of course, ICE said this gives us the pretense we need to deport you, forced him to report to ICE offices in Wichita this past week, and he was immediately detained.
And to be clear, I'm pretty sure that what ICE ended up saying was the pretense for their action against Ceballos was not even these election allegations or the plea deal. It was that he'd faced an assault charge like 30 years ago.
But telling perhaps that the Department of Homeland Security, which did not prosecute this case, issued a news release when he entered his plea deal.
Yeah. And, it is what it is. I know that his attorney, now not his immigration attorney, who's someone else, but his criminal attorney for these cases gave some really very heated quotes in interviews with the Kansas Reflector's Morgan Schulson and other reporters as well, talking about kind of, complicity of elected officials and people who were not looking out for Ceballos. But, it was something that could have easily been predicted.
I think you and others have pointed out too the reality of having, Ceballos is a big Donald Trump and Chris Kobach fan. Most of the people in that community voted for Donald Trump. They were cheering on this kind of pain and suffering for other immigrants, which happens every day in this state and every other state, until it happened to one of their own.
Well, and I mean, even here in Lawrence, there was apparently a popular local restaurant owner who was recently deported. Like the stories are everywhere. I mean, when you talk about mass deportation, you're not, the word mass is there, and it really does mean something.
And when Joe Ceballos illegally voted, this is what he was voting for.
So then moving on, really, you go straight from the legislative session, more or less, into campaign season. I mean, we're still technically, we haven't had the primaries yet, but campaign season is still in full swing.
And this was the big rush to get the legislative session over with at a record pace, right? They wanted to get to campaigns as quickly as possible.
And so let's popcorn here a few things that happened. U.S. Rep. Sharice Davids did actually file to run for re-election for her U.S. House seat.
Yeah, she had signaled that if Republicans wanted to try to gerrymander her district, she would run for U.S. Senate instead. That would make Roger Marshall very uncomfortable. She's decided to stay in her House district for the seat that she's held since she was first elected in 2018.
Well, and we should say, even though Sherman talked about gerrymandering at the beginning, and we're mentioning it now, there is really no indication that the Kansas legislature has any appetite for redrawing district maps at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the time to do this was last fall when the House tried to, when both the Senate and House tried to do this. The Senate got the signatures, but there wasn't enough support among House Republicans to do this last fall. I would imagine there's even less support now, despite what we've seen on the national stage. In part because a lot of these House members are not running for re-election, and they're no longer beholden to leadership or other influences. They can actually say, we understand this is wrong and we don't want to do it.
And also any sort of redistricting or new maps would inevitably end up in front of the Kansas Supreme Court, which, I think reasonable onlookers would expect to be rather skeptical.
Yeah, I think it was a 4-3 decision when they upheld the maps in 2022, but there's been changes on the court since then that could change that vote.
So what else? Give me something else campaign related, Sherman.
Well, Senator Cindy Holscher, a Democrat, one of the two front runners for the Democratic nomination in the governor's race this year, she announced her running mate. She picked Casey Ohabisam, a Democrat from Wichita who's been in the House for 8-10 years now, something like that. And so she's the first, I think, major candidate in either party to announce who her running mate is. We're approaching the June 1st deadline, but we expect others could announce very soon. The other Democrat in that race, Ethan Corson, also a state senator, has the governor's endorsement, of course. He has not yet announced his running mates. That could happen as soon as this week.
Well, and I would also say that this is I think, a really hard-fought battle on the Democratic side between Holscher and Corson. I think, Corson has a lot of establishment Democratic support, but, Holscher is very well known, a compelling speaker, has a lot of supporters. I will say that of those two candidates, the only one who's had a supporter knock on my door has been Cindy Holscher this last week.
Oh, interesting.
And I got a nice mailer, nice flyer.
The August primary is a long ways away. I covered a forum between these two candidates up in Johnson County a couple of weeks ago, late April, and most of that crowd supported Cindy Holscher. I think she's really leaned into being the populist candidate, kind of the insurgent candidate going up against the machinery of the Democratic Party. She's embraced populist ideas that are at odds with the governor. She opposed the Chiefs deal. She's really made a lot of fuss about Ethan Corson taking money from Core Civic in the past. Now that Core Civic has become such a flashpoint for controversy with its private prison over in Leavenworth becoming an ICE detention center. And so, she's really trying to run on that kind of support. But the question is, how big of an impact is it to have, not just the governor's endorsement, but former Governor Kathleen Sebelius, the fundraising apparatus that they've built, all of that
endorsement from Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, Planned Parenthood as well. How much
all
of an
of these
impact
things
will that
going
have?
to Corson, to be clear.
Correct. And a lot of money gets spent in July that could really, affect the outcome of the race.
Well, and I just feel like, Holscher is clearly trying to kind of take the mantle of the insurgent, as you say, kind of populist, but really a lot of it as we move closer to the actual election day, primary election day, is going to be money. It's going to be resources. How much can they spend?
I mean, those two candidates, there's very little air between them on policy issues.
Anything else, Sherman, election-wise, primary-wise?
Well, I think the big issue right now that people are concerned about is the constitutional amendment that'll be on the ballot in August. And I had a story last week with an abortion rights activist in Lawrence who's trying to get the word out that even though this amendment is about whether or not you want to elect Supreme Court justices, she sees it, and the Republican leaders who supported this amendment see it as a way to undermine abortion rights and school funding. They want to control a court or influence who gets on the court in a way that results in different decisions so that they can reverse the right to terminate a pregnancy in Kansas and maybe get away with not giving schools so much money.
And this amendment, it's one of those things where it feels like a lot of people aren't talking about it now. I think I can almost guarantee that a lot more people will be talking about it by the time we get to August.
Yeah, I think this will dominate a lot of the political discussion leading into that August 4th vote.
And I could also say that if you all subscribe to the Kansas Reflector's newsletter, which I'll get to plugging a little bit later, but both Sherman and I have already participated in and will participate in several public forums talking about this. So, if you want to get educated about it, if you want to learn more about what that amendment is, what it could potentially do and mean for Kansas, we're helping you learn.
Yeah, there's a calendar at the bottom of our daily newsletter that has all of those events, when and where they will be.
And now, just moving out of that, just briefly, looking ahead, looking up to this week, Sherman, what's something that we're working on now that our folks might be interested in?
Well, speaking of election news, we have some coverage planned from senior reporter Tim Carpenter, really looking at the long dark shadow that former Governor Sam Brownback, has cast on politics in Kansas, and what that would mean for the governor's race. Both for, I think Democrats are eager just to run against Sam Brownback again. The Republicans, in particular, Sam Brownback's Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Collier, who's running for the Republican nomination. And also, I think Senate President Ty Masterson, who was in the Senate back then and defended Brownback's tax experiment. They're going to have some hard questions if they get to the general election, if they're the nominee, about their ties to Sam Brownback.
So look for that this week in the Kansas Reflector. And if you don't want to just go to the website every now and then during the day, although why wouldn't you want to do that, please subscribe to our daily newsletter. It's at kansasreflector.com/subscribe. kansasreflector.com/subscribe. We send out a newsletter every day, each and every day of the year, and you can catch up with our headlines and commentary.
and we plan to continue to do these weekly videos, but I will be absent next week, so
Well,
look
this
forward.
week.
This week. I will be absent this week, so the next video will feature a special guest, so
That's
stay tuned
right,
for
and
that.
we don't even know who the special guest will be yet, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, I'm Clay. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody.